In this video, we'll look at how to use WorldBLD's built-in landscape tool to set up this massive open world in just a few minutes. We'll also look at how it integrates with the rest of the WorldBLD toolset to adapt to your roads and buildings. Let's get started. First up, let's gather references. Here I'm working on a fictional New England town called Rocky Springs. The defining features are the pine forests, the low mountains, and the rocky, jagged shoreline. I'll start out by sketching the basic shapes in Gaia and adding some erosion. This height map will be available for download if you want to follow along. After I finished the shape, I went ahead and added a basic texture. I also added masks for the shoreline and forest areas, which we can use for painting in Unreal. Now let's create our main level. We need to choose empty open world here, so our new level has world partition. We'll save this and create our landscape. The landscape needs to be 4033 by 4033 components for the best performance at this size. These other settings can be left alone for now. For now, we'll just create a flat landscape and project the height map later. If the landscape is set up correctly, you should see it split up into these 16 regions over in the World Partition tab. Let's load them all in and add in some lighting so we can see our new landscape. Next step is to project the height map onto the new landscape. To select the height map R16 file here and hit Import. It's okay if the height map doesn't match the landscape exactly. 4096 is close enough to the 4033 that we have. What we're going to do now is make what's called a landscape preset. This is an asset the WorldBLD tools use to populate our landscape. I'll save this as landscape preset _ Rocky Springs and open it. Here are all the different parameters that we can set for our landscape. The first one to take a look at is the material, which will be a new one in this example. Create a new material instance, assign it here, and set its parent to the WorldBLD landscape auto material. We can adjust the parameters a little more later. Our next task is to fill out the foliage settings for the different layers. I'm just going to use the default assets and replace them later. Forest, we're just going to set the trees so we have a quick preview and the rest can just be left empty. We'll also set one type for the fields for now. Now that we have a basic landscape preset with some example assets, we can go ahead and use LandBuild, which is a main tool built into WorldBLD. Let's set our preset here and hit Continue. I'm also going to set the stand layer to a beach mask I generated, but this step is optional. Once it's done, you should see a new material and simple low poly foliage. Next step is water. I'll just use a plain mesh and a water material from the city sample for this. Now let's take a look at what layers are available. If you select forest here and start painting, our PCG setup will automatically update with trees and ground cover. If you receive heavy memory use or PCG is taking a long time to rebuild, you can always turn off runtime PCG like grass. Or you can deactivate the static PCG like the forest, so it only rebuilds when you trigger it. Try the field as well, and we'll use this later to create farmland. Now that we have foliage being spawned, let's go ahead and grab the final assets. I'm just going to use free assets from mega plants for the static trees and bushes. Then I'll use free grass assets from Project Nature for the runtime scatter. The optimized grass library asset works really well with WorldBLD's runtime PCG, so this will be our grass base. With our assets downloaded, let's go back to the landscape preset. We're going to be creating our own assets for all these types of foliage. Let's get started by creating a new LandBuild mesh data asset. You can also use the Unreal MCP plugin to do this automatically, but I'm going to show you how to do it yourself for more control over the final result. I'll call this first one LandBuild mesh _ forest _ Rocky Springs. This will be our main forest asset, so we'll plug it into the mature forest trees layer. Let's go back and check our original forest asset for reference. Looking at the example, we can see the 3 mesh types that it spawns. This is where we set the meshes, the densities, the culling distance, and a couple other spawn parameters. Going back to our forest asset, let's set the meshes with one big difference. We're going to check skeletal meshes because we're using mega plants. Once you set this, you'll notice that the trees get culled way too quickly. This is because the default culling distance is too small for these large trees and needs to be increased. The value of about 1,000,000 units gives us plenty of distance to work with. These are nano trees, so they don't really need to be culled. Here are my final settings for the forest, but you can experiment on this step until you find what looks best for your level. Next step is going to be the young trees or saplings. We can just copy our forest asset and use some of the younger variations that Megaplants offers. After the young trees, let's take a look at shrubbery. This is the base for all static scatter and appears on all the layers that have static foliage. For this one, I'm just going to copy over the example static shrubbery asset and replace the meshes. If you're using mega plants, these are also going to be using the skeletal mesh option instead of the normal static mesh option. After the static shrubbery, let's move on to our first grass asset. We're using the project nature assets for this one, which is just going to be a static mesh, not skeletal. It's starting to look good, but still not quite dense enough, so we can go back to our landscape preset and increase the density a little bit. And we're done with grass. Let's go ahead and take a look at the forest ground cover next. The forest actually has more foliage types than any other layer, with ground cover, bushes, rocks, and pebbles, but for now we're just going to focus on plants. Right now we just have default assets in all the different foliage types. I'm going to go ahead and replace these one by one. The goal is to match our original reference photos, which in this case means mostly ferns with a little bit of tall grass and pine saplings here and there. And we're ready to test it out. I'm going to go ahead and grab the Rural American Road preset from the library. This one is free if you want to follow along on a trial version. Import this and then select it in the Road Draw tool. It'll conform to the landscape and clear out foliage automatically. Congrats on completing your first landscape. From here, you can continue to add more detail to your preset or begin drawing roads, buildings, and more with WorldBLD.